Right. The salamander is here, so I think that means we can probably begin.
I'm the man
I
behind the salamander.
I know who's behind the salamander, and welcome, Sam
Oh,
and all. Um, I'm just need to keep my eye on the line that's forming, so I make sure everyone is welcomed in. And at the moment, it looks like we may all be here. So, welcome to the Zoom conversation with Mike Glier, who's the Forests of Antarctica, is here in the Courthouse Gallery through June 8th. It is a show that is, well, I'm not going to describe it. Of course, that is the artist's task, but it is a show that is quite breathtaking and is engaging visitors who have attended so far through the first week of the show and the opening reception over the weekend. It is being extremely well received, with creating a lot of dialogue in the gallery itself. So I will begin with an introduction. Mike Glier, welcome. I am June Waters. I am the exhibition director here at the Courthouse Gallery of the Lake George Arts Project. Mike Glier, who was born in Kentucky, studied art and psychology at Williams College, went on to graduate from Hunter with his MFA, an advisee of Robert Morris. His accolades began early when his master's thesis, the 1979 dime store figurine, appeared in Art Forum the following year. Quite a launch to a career, I would say. Beginning his career in New York City in the late 70s and 1980s, as many of us were roaming around those neighborhoods ourselves. He was a collaborative member of, an active member of collaborative projects, worked also with group material. And one thing that's jumped out at me is Its Time May Have Come Again is an exhibition that was held at the Anina Nosai Gallery. Let me get the title correctly. White Male Power, Senators, Game Hosts, National Monuments, Popes, etc. I think it may be time to revisit that show if it's still somewhere to be had. From there, Mike moved to upstate New York in the late 80s, returned to Williams College as a professor in 1988, and has just recently retired, stating to me at the reception that now he's very happy he can devote more time to his art. I don't see any evidence that any time was lost to your dedication to your studio over those years. Over the course of those ensuing years, you've also had some exciting travels, some of which are have been published in the book, your work done along a long line, which reveals work done over a period of travel from the Canadian Arctic through the equator in Ecuador, plein air painting, inspired in part by your move to rural upstate New York and a closer relationship with the environment. This is a spectacular book, and I think does lead to a good introduction to your work with the idea that we need to look at what is the future of our environment. I love how you do this with such a spirit of hope and aesthetic. And I will now turn this over to you to share all that with us. Thank you.
thank you for that nice introduction, June. So I said hi to Susan and Grace, but hi, David. Have we met? Well, and Dan, I know you're here. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Mike. I'm just eating. I'll be on the camera soon.
Okay, well, nice of you to come. So The slideshow I'm going to present is about 30 minutes, and we're going to have a Q&A afterwards if you'd like, and come and go as you please, but thank you so much for coming. And it's a small group, so if you want to interrupt because you've got a question or something, let's just do that too. Might be more fun. So okay. Hopefully your screen share worked and you're seeing Answer Music. Okay, so today's talk is called Answer Music, which is the title of a series I'm currently working on. But before we get there, I'm going to walk through several series that are related by a change in process that happened a decade ago, when I began to use all of my senses to describe my experiences in the landscape. I often work outside. Working in the fresh air brings a new level of complexity and serendipity to drawing and painting. The light is always in flux, constantly changing the colors of things and their shadows. Birds fly by, bugs stick to the pictures, and the wind tries its best to upend everything. Insecurity becomes a part of the process. Deliberation gives way to improvisation, observation is replaced by estimation, and the intellectual satisfaction of realizing a goal dissolves into the physical joy of making something unexpected. The process behind the paintings and drawings I'm presenting today began by accident while working in the South Island of New Zealand. It's a windy place, affected by weather coming north from the Antarctic. When painting in the wind, the panel often became a sail and lifted from the easel with the breeze. And on days like this, I gave up trying to paint, and I took up pencil and paper and attempted to draw the wind. Encouraged by the unexpected results of drawing something that is invisible but can be felt, I began to draw not only what I could see, but also what I could feel on my skin and what I could hear and what I could smell. So I'm not by nature a synesthete, but this attempt to train myself to be so has created drawings and paintings that are more associative than descriptive of particular landscapes. I've entitled the following group The Forests of Antarctica, which places them either in a very distant past, when Antarctica was floating up around the equator, or the uncertain future when the continent is warm enough to support a forest. So work always begins with a walk, pencil, sketchbook, and peanut butter and jelly sandwich in hand. When I sit down to draw, I first close my eyes and take an inventory of my senses. Here I drew a little breeze, those little bubble forms that I felt in my face as it pushed through the dense foliage next to me. And sometimes I draw what I'm hearing. In this example, it was the Rio in Medio, a stream in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains that falls rapidly and gurgles happily. The sound made me so happy that I kept making upwardly curving marks that turned into clouds and smiles. Occasionally, I draw a smell. On a cliff overlooking the Atlantic in northern Maine, a sweet, flowery smell passed by. The smell looks a bit like a sailing ship, I think, with flowers. There are now 800 of these little field drawings. And sometimes I take a box of paints on my walks to record the colors of the day as well. And back in the studio, I combine the drawings and the color notes. This is the smell of crushed wild sage. Sage is green, of course, but the smell, which I find very appealing and complex, just had to be purple. During a storm, I drew the sound of the wind in my ears. The red is the blood pulsing in my ears, and the ripped shape is the tearing sound of the wind. And at a salt pond in the Caribbean, I drew a shape in response to the fecundity of the water, which is the color of beef broth. Sometimes these small works are assembled to make a single work, grouped like a collection of butterflies or fossils in a natural history museum. But often the studies are combined into large charcoal drawings, in which the edges of the forms allied so that nothing is autonomous, but all is a tangle. The charcoal drawings are then rendered in black and white, oil on paper compositions that emphasize positive and negative reversals, Or put more simply, sometimes the image is black and sometimes the image is white, and they flip back and forth. Once the black and white study is complete, the color studies are consulted. In this case, a color note from the Adirondacks about the color of a dried leaf, which is the brown color, and a brilliant wildflower. And then the painting begins. The paintings are large, about 6 feet by 10 feet, which is enough to envelop a viewer in a somatic experience. Each form in these pictures is self-contained, but since it shares edges with other forms, the integrity of each is dependent on its neighbors. It's like an ecosystem. The forms are at once discrete and dependent. And like things glimpsed while hiking, they flicker into consciousness and dissolve into space. This drawing is called Tasuki, after a town in New Mexico where I drew many of the images. I hope you can see my cursor, but there's a trumpet vine here and some hummingbirds that were on the trumpet vine. And over here, a jackrabbit. And then here is one of those smiling images from the noises, the sounds of the Rio and Medio. But the colors I used to turn this drawing into a painting actually came from studying mergansers in the fog in the Adirondacks, near Lake George, actually. And here are the merganser colors applied to the Tasuki drawing. In this series, The Forests of Antarctica, the motifs and the colors come from many places, including the island of St. John, the central mountains of New Mexico, Maine, and the Adirondacks, and of course, the Berkshires. In the past, I made landscapes that described a particular place at a particular time, but in this series, I mixed the colors and motifs as if I was describing an altered, unfamiliar world of the forests of Antarctica. So I'll end this section with a painting that hangs in the 62 Center for Theater and Dance on the Williams College campus. It's called Lake Bascom, after the ancient lake that once covered all of Williamstown. It began with a small drawing of the flight path of a bird chasing bugs and the call of crows. So this is actually sitting in a field following the flight path of a bird. I think it was a sparrow. And then here is the call of the crows, these kind of blasting shapes. My assistant, Lucy Rollins, projected the image and traced it in charcoal. Next, I worked smaller drawings into the composition, again, aligning the forms so that they share edges. Some of the additional images included fog arriving in Maine, the sound of surf, and the shadows of the sea grapes that fell on the paper as I was drawing on a beach in St. John, a startled deer in the Adirondacks, and the drawing grows. And it's important to note here that I have little idea where the painting is going to go at this point. It's just kind of growing on its own. And then the painting begins, which helps to clarify the drawing. So many of the compositional lines in the painting align with significant lines in the architecture of the 62 Center, like doors and the grid of the metal panels that cover the walls of the atrium. The colors for the picture were chosen to suit the atrium space. The dominant dark, cool gray is a hue taken from the slate floor. The tans and orange colors that are starting to appear are similar to the wood and painted accent colors used in the space. And most importantly, the mountains rising in the back, whose shape was inspired by the dome, a mountain that could be seen from the 62 Center, is the purple hue that appears in the winter months in the mountains that surround Williamstown. So I love making paintings for specific places since the place always provides guidance. The mural for the 62 Center had to not only work with the architecture and reference the landscape in which we live, but also engage with the exuberant programming of the theater and dance department. To this end, the design was full of curves and nothing is settled. It's all about movement and mutability, and a bit of drama. And if you've been to the exhibition at Lake George, you may recognize this Lake Bascom image since it hangs behind June Waters' desk at the entrance or next to her desk. And now on to another related series, the field notes. So the field notes are a series of small paintings in which I often combine color notations, drawing, and written notes about the circumstances in which the painting was made. I like them in groups, since together they tell a story of all the little things that go on every second of the day, mostly unseen. With this in mind, I'm going to string a few together as if it were a story. Morning light approaches over the ocean. Big, loud surf. Sunny, 89 degrees, mostly alone. Black stones stirred by tropical surf knock and clack as the water drags through them. The sky flattened into a flower. A coyote hunting in the morning. The thunderstorm came over the ridge, surprising it. There was little cover. The birds fly away with purpose. The clouds are in columns, but from the ground it can only see their dark undersides. The wind lifts the skirt of trees, ripping the leaves. Fog. A loon fishing. Two seals rode the tide as it surged into Cobscook Bay. The building clouds looked like a brain. When drawing and painting out of doors, there isn't a break between thinking and doing. In the best moments, there is no lag between the movement of the sun and the wind and the response of the brush and the knife. Stimulus and response become a single thing, and the experience is one of feeling very connected with the subject. It's a delightful state of being in which what is inside gets thoroughly mixed up with what is outside. A squirrel leaving the Anthropocene. An elk leaving the forest. Foothills, water source nearby, a tangle. A coastal forest, a few noises it couldn't name. It heard a bear growl, and this was true. So here's the eye of the bear. Here's the growl, and I think this is me over here quaking. Two red house finches flying through the aspen trees. And a bird song. E twiddly dee, e twiddly don't. Quiet. So when I draw outside, I feel like the place in which I'm sitting is giving me little gifts. It gives me shapes, textures, colors, sounds, and sensations as prompts. And with appreciation, I return the gift in the form of a drawing or painting. I'm reluctant to describe this exchange as if it were a relationship with another sentient being, since it suggests I've gone a little nutty and strayed from rationality to favor magic. But there is something here worth considering, and it's not necessarily at odds with rational thinking that drives science and provides so many good things. Imagining the human relationship with nature as one of reciprocity, or more simply, thinking of it as a culture of gift exchange, may be the turn of mind necessary to counter the extremes of rationality that have provided argument for taking too much and depleting the natural world to the point of crisis. This is a grand thought in which to frame modest paintings of coyotes hunting and stones knocking about in the waves, but it is nevertheless one of the ideas that compels me to make them. So I spent some time in Somerset, England lately, walking through the countryside. and making pictures of what I saw and felt. As I walked, I was astonished by how the hills folded into one another. Oops, skipping on me. I was sitting on top of a hill one afternoon and a bird passed by. Suddenly it stopped, flapping its wings, and rose on an updraft. It was one of those moments when good design, a bird wing, is put to use to save energy. But the effect was more than a moment of admiring good mechanics. The effect was to raise my spirit. I came across a herd of sheep in a meadow strewn with boulders. Then I sat down on a rock and tried to visualize the bleating of sheep. This little painting grew into something larger, a whole world of crying beasts. On a blustery day in January, I walked to a 17th century chapel attached to a local manor to sit in the graveyard on a favorite bench to draw. On my way there, I passed through several farms, riling the dogs, and this is the picture of the dogs barking at the dog sounds. And their complaints provided the beginning of this composition, the sound of farm dogs disturbed by my passing. So up here, this is actually the sound of doves that were also present, and some, I think, apple trees. And here, this kind of curves are actually the river I was walking along. And over here are the farm dogs and some benches to sit and admire the Somerset landscape. So the River Brew flowed behind the house I was staying in, and I visited it often during the 4 non-consecutive months that I was in Somerset. The River Brew is a slow-moving river that murmurs, and this is the drawing of the murmuring sound. Along the river, there were snowdrops and swallows. Impatiens glandulifera in the summer, really beautiful flower, but it actually is a weed. But in all this natural glory, I could smell the gas station that was also perched nearby on the banks of the Brew. And all this came together in a large oil painting called "There is a Faint Odor of Petroleum and the Birds Are Singing." And the colors here are kind of pastel-y, but they're also supposed to be reminiscent of the colors of oil on water, the sort of rainbow effect of petroleum as it floats across water, which is quite beautiful, but disturbing. Besides walking around the countryside, I also spent a good deal of time working in a large garden attached to an art center that is the creation of Hauser and Wirth Gallery, at which I was the artist and educator in residence. The garden was designed by Pete Udoff, who is best known in the States for landscaping the High Line in New York. I'm going to break from the narrative tour now and spend a little time talking about a subject that underlies much of what I do. It's not obvious, but it's there in the backstory. So I'm a great fan of gardens, and my fondness for them stems from more than the obvious delights of color and fragrance. It has to do with masculine identity. I grew up in Kentucky, and the normal male, and normal here is in quotes, in teenage boy culture was to be aggressive, decisive, a sexual conqueror, athletic, good with numbers and money, and to know how to read a map. Unfortunately, I was only good at reading maps, and I can make light of it now, but the conventions of masculinity were threatening and maddening, even though my white male identity provided exceptional privileges. In the 1980s and 90s, I made artwork exploring my identity as a white, able-bodied Christian male. Often the images were drawn with irony and anger. It was not a sophisticated gender analysis. It was instead an angry expression of repression and confusion. While engaged with this, I moved to the country, had a child, and began to garden. Slowly, the subject matter for art began to include the landscape. I began to think of the gardener as an idea. The gardener could be construed as a form of identity. The gardener is a caretaker who shapes things into a cultivated state. Gardeners plant and tend, but they also cut and reap, so they are not innocent. Gardening is not a gendered activity. It is enjoyed by all of us, and as an identity, it is gender neutral. The idea of the gardener was a solution I was looking for in my personal quest to resolve my internal conflicts with traditional masculinity. I was personally comfortable inhabiting the gardener, and I've stayed there ever since. In fact, like a gardener who constructs a place with plants, a space with plants, I began a career as a plein air painter who constructs a painting with natural forms. This painting about the exuberance of Udall Field is called Joy Arriving. So back to the narrative garden tour. One day in late summer, I was sitting in the garden and I heard a kerfuffle nearby, on the ground hidden by the plants. Suddenly, a ground bird exploded from its cover, and it was not clear what was after it. The bees were also making noise, but less dramatically. I followed the sound to an unassuming plant from the mint family that they loved. I noticed the myriad little trumpet-like florets on each plant, which inspired this painting called Horns of Mint. So here are two very large horns based on that little tiny flower I was studying. Here's the bee, kind of in the negative shape there. A stray dog, which might have been the culprit that scared the bird in the first place. Another dog down here. And here's the startled ground bird, kind of hidden in the brush. So answer music is what I'm working on now. And it began as an extended series of pencil drawings of local landscapes, which I began in 2020 as the COVID lockdown became real. The title Answer Music began as an extended series of pencil drawings. Oops, the title Answer Music is another term for call and response, a form of worship in which the preacher makes a declaration and the congregation responds with fervid unity. Like other series you've seen today, these drawings began with a walk to a field or a forest or a stream. I find a good place to sit and wait for the call. If I'm sitting near the Hoosic River, the prompt may be a sound, like the mix of low rumbling and tearful bubbling made by shallow water as it passes quickly over stones. Or the prompt might be a great flock of blackbirds who collected on the banks of the Hoosic in October to sing a dramatic and complicated chorus. Or the call might be an action, like the flow of Broadbrook, a favorite walk of mine, as it takes on speed compressed by narrow channels of boulders, only to slow down and pool on the other side. There's a little copse between a pasture and a gully that I like to visit. In November, the last of the leaves were shaking and falling with the breeze. Many of the answer music drawings are composed along horizontal lines like this one, as if they were a musical score. And I try to make these drawings rhythmic and repetitive, like many natural events, but also like music. But try as I might to be as constant as the river, I can never sustain it. My arm tires or my mind wanders, and as a result, the mark changes. But it's these little failures which insert change into the process that I find most poignant, since they represent change. My attention wandered when I was drawing the bottom edge of this drawing, and the ruler slipped. Instead of a mistake, the errant line became a threshold upon which I added an image of my grandson and me visiting the copse, which is a routine of ours. At moments like this, when things go awry, I often think of John Cage and his passion for chance as the driving force in any creative, dynamic adventure. Oops. And as I collect motifs and combine them, this is the winter motif, I also think of Sol LeWitt and his fascination with variables and the potential for beauty to be discovered in their permutations. But I also think about Robin Wall Kimmerer, I think a writer a lot of us have been thinking about, a botanist and citizen of the Potawatomi Nation who has written about the grammar of animacy. While studying the Potawatomi language, Kimmerer noted that 70% of the words were verbs, compared to English, in which the ratio is 30% of verbs. There are verbs in Potawatomi for to be a hill, or to be red, or to be a long sandy stretch of beach. So this is very different from English, a noun-based language that seems very well suited for culture obsessed with things. So the grammar of animacy is a language that has few nouns to indicate uniqueness, but endless verbs to describe the ceaseless exchange between all things. It's my hope that through the direct study of nature, I can find the abstract motifs and rhythms that depict not the things, but the dynamic relationship between things, and create a grammar of animacy in drawing and painting. The Answer Music series now has grown into a painting series whose subject and motifs were developed in the drawings. So there are still birds coming and going. These are great blue herons that live on the Hoosic River behind where I live. And the sounds of water. This is a painting made on Broad Brook in Williamstown, again, my favorite walk. And the feel and flutter of a breeze in the trees. And the colors, smells, and shapes of the changing season. So I'll end today with a few examples from a series, The Bird Songs of the Boston Public Gardens, which I made for the Krakow-Witkin Gallery in Boston. The bird songs which persist in urban spaces like the public gardens are testaments to unity. Each doo-doo, dee-dee, and twit-twit that resonates off the pavement and brick of the city is a song of reconciliation that says nature and culture are not separate things, but are a single entity, the living world. The abstract design placed over the bronze of Thomas Cass, a Civil War soldier, is the call of a robin that was singing nearby. Why I keep skipping. If the song is, the language and music of art overlap. So it's not too difficult to translate sound into image. The abstraction here is an unidentified bird call laid over a Memorial Day display. As a bird call rises and falls in pitch, so does my hand. As the volume increases, so does the size of the mark. Round sounds are drawn as ample loops with a soft hand, and sharp, raspy sounds are made with pointed and short marks, drawn with clenched fingers. And the concept of rhythm brings these forms together into a unified flow. If the song is simple, so is the mark. And if the song is complicated and unpredictable, so is the drawing. The sound of a woodpecker drumming bisects the scene near the pond of the public gardens. The work I've shared today is propelled by a number of things, including the love of paint and abstraction, but most importantly, by a desire to do my part, to help make the changes in philosophy that are required if humanity is to create a sustainable future. By studying the land and responding to it freshly, I hope to demonstrate attachment, respect, and engagement. And if the drawings and paintings are good enough, they will find their way into public life through the internet, publications, and exhibitions to do their job of representing the joy of living in the world and the wonder of perceiving it. And if they succeed at this, to evoke the will to create balance within it. This is the song of a song sparrow. you. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. What a rich and wonderful journey that was through your imagery, through the associations you've made. Certainly inspires one to immerse oneself in a landscape in a completely new way, beyond just the horizon, the sky, and the land. And I so appreciate this dialogue. And now we will open it up to questions, comments.
Regrets.
Okay, oh, sorry, I'll
No,
say
no,
something.
go
I'll
ahead.
ask a question. I haven't seen any of these new ones with the figure, like there's a male figure in them, and the ones that you just did,
Mhm.
Boston, those are interesting. You haven't put them online yet, have you? I mean, I haven't seen them on Instagram.
Well, actually, they're a few years old, Grace. I think it was in
Oh, they're-
20, I think
yeah.
I did the show in 22. So I think it's probably online, but it's been a while ago.
Because the dichotomy, and I first got to know your work through the White Man, the early pieces. I love them. I mean, and these too. But to see how you combine Tsuki. I used to live in New Mexico,
Uh,
and I never go anywhere ever. And there you are. You're taking something from New Zealand and then New Mexico, and you're using sound and poetry. It's just it was wonderful to hear you talk about the work and how you use the mark. I was surprised to see some your assistant painting on the large one. That's because I have no idea of the scale of them quite often.
yeah, I know. And Instagram, we're really lousy about actually putting out the details, right? Just kind of like maybe.
Right. And that's I mean, I haven't seen them in person
Yeah,
yet.
yeah.
At House, I was sorry I had to miss. I think you had a show and I missed it. But thank you very much. I really
Grace, it's awful
it
nice.
makes me look at nature anew because I'm one like Woody Allen who I don't like too much, but who would be behind a window with bugs trying not to have a bug come near me or something. And so your work has put me more, more aware of the breadth, BREADTH of the world around me. So
Yeah,
thank you.
it's so nice to go out and like sit quietly and just let it all come to you. That's what I've learned. You don't have to do much. Just go any place and sit and just listen and feel your skin and
Mhm.
close your eyes and then look later. It's a nice way to use your senses.
Yeah, a hyper person like myself rarely does that. It would be good for me to do.
Good
So,
for your heart.
yeah, thank you.
Yes, there
Hey,
is quite
Mike,
a bit of the be here now in your work. Sorry, Dan.
no, I was just going to jump in and say that I really love how effortlessly the work goes from naturalistic representation of, a fox in the underbrush or a landscape to things that are pure pattern, just these kind of abstract rhythms that are the depictions of sounds or the depictions of other things. And I think it's wonderful that how things are represented, how you get the information across to us visually is incredibly liberating in terms of the kinds of marks that you make.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as a teacher, I learned long ago that the division between abstraction and representation doesn't exist. And I'd never teach it that way. Underneath every good representational picture, there's an abstract scaffolding, And so it just seems quite natural to go back and forth between the two to me. And I think for me, it's a good way to try to represent the landscape in a different way, because the landscape is all about rhythms, right? And motion, and also a lot of repetition.
Patterns.
Patterns, right? Yeah, DNA molecules, and and those ones that mutate every once in a while. So, I think the patterns are a way to kind of get to that. And I also put that thing in about, mistakes happening when I try to be consistent. So fascinated by that. I can sustain a kind of pattern for maybe, 15 minutes or something. And then inevitably I screw up. And it just seems like the way of the world, right? It's just, seems that's how change is made.
Yep, give in, don't fight it.
Nope. Make
I
something
can't
up.
wait to see the show. Congratulations.
Glad you're coming. How are you feeling, incidentally? You look good.
I feel great, thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Miracles of modern medicine.
Great.
At the reception, you spoke a bit about your work with Charles Birchfeld works, and I have to say now that that was brought to our attention as I look through, as I see the work you presented here. I do see the way that your work and his work do represent the energy, the vibrancy of landscape in such a kind of connected way. Can you speak a little bit about that connection?
Yeah, I saw Birchfield when I was a student at Williams College the first time, and Williams has two really major pictures. And the first one I saw was a very gloomy swamp scene called the First of Spring or Early Spring or something. And I thought, oh, that's gloomy and dull. And I kind of walked away. But then it really struck with me, and I went back. And then I started paying attention to how he uses abstraction to represent sound. And I got so interested in his synesthesia. And so I followed his work and looked at his work ever since, and I went out to Buffalo years and years ago, to a show at Hall Walls, and I went to the Birchfield Penny Museum there to go through, see the work. And then I went out to the Birchfield Penny to be a visiting artist out there, and went through the collection and started looking through the archives. And I started writing more about Birchfield on Instagram, to try to get a hold of what his accomplishment was, and how I see Birchfield as actually a kind of role model for artists who want to work in the landscape these days, because of his immersion in it and his willingness to engage abstraction, and how he models kind of a reciprocal relationship with the landscape. He kind of gets these prompts, and then he processes them in his mind, and he puts them back out again. It was very much an exchange. He's not just representing something, copying it down. He exchanges and processes and something, and then the landscape gives him something else again, and he works with it and puts it back out. And that reciprocity I just really admire. So he's become, if it's possible to have a mentor of someone who's dead a long time, he's been a mentor for me. So we're actually going to do a show together at the Birchfield.
Really?
Yeah, which is great. In this coming fall. And then supposedly it's coming to New York. I won't announce that yet, but supposedly it's going to happen at a
Oh,
gallery.
terrific.
Yeah.
Well, I love his diaristic writing,
Mm-hmm.
his daily, outings.
There's a
And
new
we hear
book
about
out.
his family and his aunt at the Birchfield Penny site, which is a terrific site that I follow as well.
There's a new book out, Grace, that was edited by a poet who went through all like 17,000 pages of his diary.
Oh,
It's incredible, and edited down what he thought were the best pieces. So, and it's just come out. I think John Yao was working with Eric Aho to do some sort of work around this new book that Birchfield is. So
The writings.
the writings. Yep. Have you seen the book, Dan?
No.
Yeah, no, me either.
no,
So
but what I love, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Dan, it's the writing underneath the painting of the day. I mean, he would write his notes. I went out, I saw this, I went shopping with my wife. I mean, there was the pedestrian, there were these levels that I love. He would write these notes. And I think you, Mike, also have been writing, or had been thinking about writing, or do you, about each piece. And these are not just the notes, but a longer
I don't write diary.
paragraph.
I as June noted, my graduate advisor was Robert Morris, and I actually wanted to
Mhm.
study him because I loved his writing so much. I read
Yeah.
everything he wrote about sculpture and minimalism back in the day, and then
In Art Forum.
yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
remember.
Yeah, so I've always admired I've always admired artists who write and artists who are start to create the language around their work rather than leaving it to other people to create the language around their work. So I've always tried to write, now and then. I enjoy it. It's fun. It's another good way to kind of communicate, right? So
Well, it gives us insight as well, which I think, and gives it a kind of human, there's a real human element when I read the Birchfields as well. And then I look at the pieces, and his feeling about snow and his feeling about the touch and the scent. It's so it's so sensual in a lot of ways.
it's funny,
Sensory.
the more I've been writing, the more I really care about word choice, and I really ponder over which word I'm going to choose. And I think, like learning to mix colors, you get really, really careful getting exactly that right gray or that right blue. I
Yeah.
think it's that kind of attention to detail that's made me really more thoughtful about words than I used to be.
I liked some of the pieces you have here, and then you see them in your notes, the titles or what you jot down. Not a lot of adjectives, just the facts. And that, I think, brings out so much without casting something else on the visual, to just say, I smell petroleum and the birds are singing. It's not, this is an awful smell, but the bird song is beautiful. You don't need any of that. It's all there in the facts. So
Thanks.
and the great pieces.
Hey,
So
David back there, do you want to say anything?
I don't know how am you hearing me now?
yes,
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't know how the audio worked, so I wasn't.
Ah,
Yeah, well, we first met, you came to Rutgers University
yeah.
through Leon Golub. And that's when I first met you.
Mm.
And I also showed in a lot of the exhibitions in the early 80s, Artist Call, all those
Ah,
organized things.
were you teaching at Rutgers?
No, I did my MFA there with Leon.
Okay.
And then I worked with Leon and Nancy for like 25 years.
Oh, lucky you.
I was their image person.
I didn't know that.
And Leon had a thing for images.
And Nancy with that table, right? With all
Right.
those cutouts laid out all over the place, and she
Right.
picked up and
I
Put the-
helped transform Nancy's work from her hand to a photographic base.
Hmm.
So I
Really?
started working with Nancy in 1979, 80, somewhere around there.
Wow. What do you mean you turn into a photographic base? What does
Well,
that mean?
Nancy had arthritis, very bad arthritis, and lost her drawing ability. Basically, she still drew a little bit. So we took images from mythology and all that, and generated printing plates, which she then.
And wood blocks. Wow.
Wow.
So I worked with Nancy on all those mythological characters that showed up in her works for years. And with Leon, he had a image base he wouldn't. So I worked with Leon a lot. I photographed his work. All the publications were mostly my photographs.
Oh, wonderful.
So,
Well,
you know,
I miss them
so I've
both.
been around a while. I'm upstate now.
Yeah, aren't we all? Except for Grace. Grace is the holdout.
Well, that's true.
No.
It be-
Actually, I did have a place upstate in New Paltz,
Oh, you did?
and I saw a bunch. I was there. Yeah, I had an old toy factory in 1970, of
Wow.
which, or 70, no, 76 when I came back from New Mexico. and I lasted 3 days. I saw a bunch of snakes, which you would have loved most probably, curled around a tree. I came right back to New York. I'm never going back there again. So there you go. So
The
I did have
wild
my
is
experience.
repulse.
It was no Stone Ridge, actually, town was Stone Ridge. And it is good to see you, Dan, because I know you look well.
Thank you, Grace. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while too. Yeah.
I was thinking, Dan, you were in my studio in like 1981 or something.
Uh.
It was
I was probably starstruck at the time, Mike.
no, I was starstruck. You were the curator from the big museum. I was like,
Yes, it did.
whoa. So
I'm just starstruck around artists. That's the thing.
time goes by. Well, you're an artist now.
That's what I was
long-
just gonna say. You've become an artist.
It was.
Collage. You're doing a lot of
How long have
collage.
you been doing that, Dan? The collage stuff?
I was doing it up until 1990, and
Oh,
then I started again in 2016.
Wow. Bit of a break
Put it away for a very quick quarter century, just
there.
like that. And then pulled out the same materials and
Ah.
started doing the same thing. But I suddenly was like, all the reasons to not do it had melted away.
Yeah. Are you still doing it?
Oh, yeah.
Good. Good.
well, to me, it's the best thing you could do for yourself. You know, to lose yourself in
I
behind
agree. And after
painting and not
hearing,
go outside.
after listening to Mike talk, I'm even more convinced.
Dan has a great studio archive place up here in Glens Falls.
Oh, wow.
All of that magic is happening. So hopefully it will be seen again soon in public. There was a short show here at the Lake George Arts Project in 2021, which was very well received. But you know, we've got 3 more years of production up in that studio. So hope to see that. And since we're doing a little bit of Old Home Week, I have to confess that Dan Cameron is the reason that I too have somewhat followed in the historical footsteps of studying and remaining extremely interested in contemporary art, and am very fortunate to have landed here where contemporary art is part of our mission for showing here in upstate New York. So credit all around.
All right.
And nights like this where I just walk away so inspired and so just feeling that art is doing what it needs to do, which is making people feel, see, hear differently than they did maybe when they even got up this morning, when they come through the gallery and read what you've written and take a good look at your book. So in the interest of time, I do want to thank everyone for coming to this presentation this evening. Also some events that are coming up relevant to the exhibition next week. There is a poetry reading here for those who are geographically close enough to attend here in the Courthouse Gallery. Local poet Susan Jeffs will be reading some of her own poetry, which is nature inspired, and also some that she has written in response to this exhibition. Following that, on Sunday, May 26th, from 1 to 4 will be our Sunday arts programming, which is a gallery tour and art making opportunity for all ages. My intention, weather permitting, is to go outside and have people draw what they feel, how the heat. Just use your drawings and paintings as the inspiration to just translate those into the kind of personal language that you have done. So for those who can attend, or please spread the word about those 2 upcoming events. Of course, everything is always available to be found on our website. So thank you, Mike. Thank you for this exhibition. Thank you for this evening. And I will say good evening to everyone. I know you will carry this talk with you. So,
And
I
we're
hope-
getting you
Thank
up one
you.
way or the other, Grace. We're getting you up here. We're getting you up north.
and no snakes in Lake George,
No snake,
Oh,
just a salamander here
I'd
below.
love to come. Yeah.
just a salamander.
Nice to
I'll
see
wear
you.
boots and
It's
David, nice
beautiful.
to meet you.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm Mike
Thank you.
Glier.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Nice seeing everybody.
There was more here than you thought. Please.
Goodbye. Goodbye.